got to say, when I went to the Brave Angels Gettysburg conference, I was thoroughly re-energized, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to reboot Deliberation Gateway, and I'm going to build on the contacts and the circle of trust that I've been building up over the last 5 years. We're not the only group. We're not trying to take over from other groups, but the more nodes in the network in the US, the more robust the network, and as a result, I think we will be able to help the whole of the nation make this transition from the democracy that we have at the moment to a much more inclusive, participatory, deliberative democracy. And what that looks like is, of course, down to all Americans, all the United States citizens. It's, that's the hallmark of the US, isn't it? The self-made country. So we've got some great speakers today, and I'm going to introduce them all in a second. I really think that we're on the verge of the transition to a whole new way of doing democracy, and I'm really excited about this. As a scientist, I think about emergent concepts all the time, and we're learning more and more about psychology and the brains and how it works. And I think that understanding how to connect people is how you kind of create an emergent society. It's designing the right processes by which people interact that gives rise to the state of the civilization, the nature of that civilization. And this is, in my mind, a science thing, but walking that walk and feeling it and experiencing it are two completely different things. And that's what we're here today to talk about, is technology and deliberation. How can technology help us reach out to all parts of society, but in that meaningful way in which that interaction between humans is a human interaction, and is one where we learn from each other, one where we can develop group policies across a whole room. And this is not an easy task. This is a task that has confronted humanity since we began, but we've evolved to be social creatures. So these interactions are important the way that they are, and it's important that we understand us as biological creatures, but also within the context of our environment. There's a lot to think about. So yes, so I'll just very briefly introduce our panelists. We've got Professor John Gastile, who's the Distinguished Professor of Communications, Art and Sciences. I'm going to ask each of our scientists, each of our panelists to introduce themselves in a moment. Starting with John, because he's got this kind of theory, and he's written a lot of books about deliberative democracy. And perhaps the thing that's most germane to this conversation is his work leading the Democracy Machine Collaborative. And I'm really excited about that. I'm hoping he's going to tell us a little bit more about that. It's all about how to improve platforms for deliberation online. So we're going to get a bit of theory from John, and then one second, John, I'll let you have the gavel in 2 seconds. But after that, we're going to speak to Liz and Alice, who have got some great examples. And then after that, we're going to hear from Andrew, who's the CTO of Braver Angels, and he's going to talk to us about the needs of a big organization in its online tools. So there's a whole logic to our panelists here today, and I'm hoping that between us all, we'll be able to have a really nice conversation. And in fact, the less people hear from me, the better, right? So if you start to have a conversation among yourselves, I'm absolutely fine with that, but don't worry. So John, if you go first, if you would like to introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about your background and what got you into all of this, that would be really helpful.
Sure. My name is John Gastile. I'm a professor at Penn State University, and was raised Quaker back in the day, and this is the Quaker state, Pennsylvania. And it had a big influence on my career because, as political as my family was, constantly arguing, sometimes violently at the dinner table, there was also this backdrop of the pursuit of consensus in Quakerism, the idea that everyone had this insight within them. We just had to bring forward through good process. So when I went to graduate school, that's what I gravitated towards. So now I'm a scholar of deliberative democracy, which really tries to bring together the best of both real, sincere political contestation and this deliberative impulse for striving toward common understanding, using arguments that appeal to the common good, experiencing empathy and true consideration of different points of view. So my career in some ways is trying to fuse together the impossibly paradoxical childhood that I experienced in a political family infused with Quakerism.
Oh, I think you're muted there, Chris. I think it's yourself.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So, I mean, wow. Yeah. So, would you like to tell us a little bit more about the democracy machine? But we'll introduce the other people as well in a sec, don't we?
Sure, absolutely. So, the last few years, spurred by a tongue-in-cheek title of a talk in San Jose, is to bring people together to try to improve deliberation online. The idea that you can mechanistically fabricate deliberative democracy, I think, is kind of hilarious, but I've leaned into it. And you can think of it as, what are the ways in which we could redesign and reimagine the digital world to actually facilitate democracy? So what are the ways we could create better motivations for people to participate, more incentives for public officials and public agencies to draw on public input? And the core idea of the theory that kind of binds together all the collaborators in that project is that you really need to create a system that's ongoing, so that you start to get the kind of payoff of repeated iterations of public engagement, feedback, response, and so on. It really should be a pretty virtuous cycle. It has not been built yet. So right now we are writing grant proposals and designing processes to study things that are not on this earth in any corner of it. So it's at once an ambitious kind of political theory idea and also a serious empirical project. And that misguided approach to a research career is the unfortunate result of actually having had success doing that. So I, in 2000, wrote a book called By Popular Demand that proposed an electoral reform, which the state of Oregon then implemented, and I spent 10 years studying, and it more or less shows that deliberative elections can be achieved by degrees by having a deliberative mini public really kind of write voting guides that voters can use to make more informed judgments during elections. I wish Australia had implemented that right about now, and that it had swung the results of an upcoming election. But in any case, that's where I find myself again, advocating the study of something that does not yet exist.
But I feel like it's on the cusp of existing, and I think as we listen to some of our other speakers, we'll see that that is genuinely emerging. So I'm gonna ask Liz to introduce herself next from Computational Democracy, who she is the Chief Operating Officer of Computational Democracy. Is that right? And I was really excited to find out that you'd been to Antarctica as well. I kind of really want to hear about that, but you know, we've got more important things to talk about right now.
Yes, well, that was for art.
Oh, okay, wow, that's brilliant. So yeah, so would you like to introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about Pol? Did you say Pol.is or Pol.is? What is the correct way of saying it? Yeah.
Pol.is is the software, is the code base. Pol.is is the home instance. That's a website that anyone in the world can use for free.
Brilliant.
So, I mean, I brought a few slides, but maybe we're more casual here talking about
It's
ourselves.
up to you, whatever you feel like. However you want to present yourself. Yeah.
Well, for myself, I think a notable project that I did many years ago was dropped out of college entirely and went to sit on the side of the road with a sign that said, "Talk to me." And we would meet strangers. This was all over New York City and eventually 10,000 miles around the United States for a year, listening to people and getting them to talk to each other and throwing parties where no one's voice was allowed to be amplified over anyone else's. And we decorated the space with questions, tiny rhetorical questions in 12-point font on tabletops, banners with political questions hung over the outdoor movie theater screens, and allowed people to self-organize around questions. And we had a kind of an emergent moderation, and that really guided my next 20 years, I guess those years add up, of work helping citizens, movements, self-organize now on and offline to handle the problems that are most important to them. And I've ended up starting 3 movements as co-founder that have grown to thousands of people, and 2 more. I have also background in the environmental participatory sciences.
Right, brilliant. Yeah, I mean, would you say that's your chief driving force, like the environment, or is it then more about getting people together? What's, you know, the real driving force there for you?
Sometimes I say that I'm ready for a new mass movement around empiricism. And for that, existing in the physical world is quite helpful. Look around. This is what I see. What do you see? Let's talk about what we see differently. Very helpful. Science is extremely helpful grounding for deliberation, but primarily people interpret my work as in collective intelligence. So even my environmental projects have been classified as collective intelligence.
Right. We can touch on that as well. I'm sure we will, about, you know, this idea of emergent consciousness and, you know, it's kind of what we're in a way trying to achieve, but in a wise way. Go on.
I was going to segue, if I have a little time, to speak about Pol.is, which is an open source system so that the public can control the agenda. Agenda setting has been a pretty tough nut to crack. So we have, so we applied some math. It's all auditable and open source. And the return on investment for people using the same tools and investing them again and again and having that value grow continually in the commons has come up with an industry valuation back of the napkin of over $100 million of value now existing for the world to use. We have 4 national governments contributing code. That's Taiwan, Finland, the United Kingdom, and Canada. And 3 of those national governments are running Pol.is as national democratic infrastructure. There's an origin story from Taiwan and their occupation that we could go into if we want, as well as the mechanics of the algorithms that we use. But today I'm looking forward to talking with this group about the potential of working with a tool that's designed as a pipe, like Unix. So there's a lot of room for design process innovation around Pol.is for different configurations to match with what your local context is, and a world of socio-technical method innovation that's growing up from the indigenous communities that we're partnering with, because speech is very different in traditional land-based communities, all the way to more automated processes. The other thing I hope comes up today is, since there's people from movements for upgrading democracy, those are non-traditional institutional structures, and themselves as groups of people who are choosing to work together have their own dynamics, and they think there's a bit of conversation to be had. How do you handle diversity within a vanguard? And how do you coordinate work to allow, you know, these deliberative experiences to be brought then to so many more Americans in this case?
Yeah, that's the game. Yeah, I mean, one of the chief driving forces for me setting this up was the Brave Angels Civic Renewal Movement. You know, it's like there's different attempts across the US to try to gain sort of mass traction in this area to get more and more people involved. And so, you know, I feel like this is at once exciting and also kind of like a bit nerve-wracking, you know, because people have been thinking about deliberative democracy for a long time, and there's definitely do's and don'ts. And, you know, what if this mass expansion movement gets it wrong or we waste this opportunity? So there's all these doubts that come to mind, but I want to create this kind of assurance that actually people have been doing this and it works. And, you know, we've got a lot of background data and knowledge, and perhaps one of the most established techniques is deliberative polling. And so Alice, hi, thanks for coming along.
Yes.
Yeah, and so you're the Associate Director of the Stanford Deliberative Democracy Lab, PhD from Stanford, and focus in political communication. And you've been all over the world advising governments and looking at the effects of class in deliberation and equality. You know, so tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us, a little bit how you got involved in Stanford and, what's going on over there.
Not too exciting. I did my undergrad at Stanford and it just never left, really.
Fair enough.
So I started working in deliberative democracy when Jim Fishkin arrived at Stanford. That was 2003, and it's been 20 years.
Wow.
We've been doing deliberative polling, as you noted, in person. We started out playing with various online methods at that time where it was just voice. No one had enough bandwidth or technology to actually do video and various other things. But now we've migrated to today, where we actually have a AI-assisted deliberative platform that operates in 25 different languages. We've used it in 30 plus countries, and we've logged 40,000 hours of deliberation on this platform. And I would say my interest in the area, in this field, really stems from wanting people, as what John was saying in the chat, imagine the world as if it actually existed. It's just, what would people really think? Like, if we gave them the time and space to actually think about what they wanted, think about how policies should be done, and give people an opportunity to actually be considered and think about it reasonably. So that kind of drove my research, both academically and in the field. And so we've done these projects in mainland China and, authoritarian places, and in democracies and places that, don't have much technology going. And so really we've done it in a lot of different places. And one of the issues that we found, as both Chris, you and Liz have been alluding to already, is understanding how we can bring more people into these spaces together and equip them with the necessary either technology or knowledge to engage. And that really was the genesis of why we even thought about creating this AI-assisted platform, and with the goal of scaling deliberation to societies, and hopefully at one point an entire society can deliberate simultaneously together.
Yeah, that would be amazing. And yeah, and so perhaps then, for the benefit of the people who are in the audience, who maybe haven't heard about deliberative polling,
Sure.
How is deliberative polling different from other forms of deliberation? And
I think the way I think about it is the components in themselves are really nothing special. There's a survey, there's small group discussion, there are expert panels, but the difference is the implementation and the rigor that we apply to it. We always start with the representative sample, and that's something we try not to compromise with. And the survey methodology that we have is very extensive, and our survey instrument generally is pages and pages long, and we really want to capture as much information as we can so that we can explain opinion change and other aspects that happen within deliberation. And I think one of the key drivers of this is when we invite people in, we really tell them this is once in a lifetime experience, potentially, that you engage with diverse others and have thoughtful discussions with people together, and potentially have a voice in the policy that's being discussed. I think we've been very fortunate that we've been able to partner with governments and policymakers in different parts of the world where they have subscribed to the methodology, and therefore in Mongolia, there's a law on deliberative polling where whenever there's a constitutional amendment, the entire country deliberates nationally on what is being amended. We've done projects in South Korea where they're making electoral reform changes now as we speak in anticipation of the 2024 elections in South Korea. So I think that the difference I would say is the way that we're implementing it and how we're providing the analysis and such afterwards. And really, I think on the whole, all the methods have merit. And what I'm really interested in, why we're all here, is trying to understand how to just bring more people into the conversation and allow them to build the skills that we need to have people thinking more thoughtfully overall.
Wow. And that's brilliant. That actually is a fantastic segue to Braver Angels. Talking about building skills, this is sort of the raison d'etre. And also interesting that the case study that we're going to look at in a bit is about electoral reform in the US. So the fact that people are already using deliberative polling in other countries to address electoral reform processes is fascinating comparison. I don't know if it'd be possible at some point, but it'd be nice maybe later on just to have a screenshot of what that software looks like. I don't know. I just put that in as a thought, but I'm planting that seed now. But right now, I would like to introduce our last panelist, Andrew, who is the CTO of Braver Angels, which is a tremendous organization across the US that I am actually a member of. I'm in my local chapter here in Pennsylvania, and we actually it's all about depolarizing and getting people to talk to each other. And so, Andrew, perhaps you would like to sort of introduce yourself, talk about Braver Angels a little bit. What is it? What's its goal? What's the Civic Renewal Movement all about? Yeah.
All right, I'll do my best. I'm just a grubby CTO, so I'm a total imposter as far as the rest of this panel is concerned. But my journey into being a CTO to Braver Angels, for what it's worth, started with a total debacle trying to use Facebook for discussion purposes around the Minneapolis Police Department's use of force policy. And it was right around the time prior to the kind of before it became clear just how sweeping a social event the George Floyd death was. I had started looking into the police use of force policy, and I posed what I thought was an interesting and provocative question on Facebook for discussion among my friends, and it proved to be a career-ending event, right? Like so my entree into and I had always been very tech forward, and I actually had cultivated a fairly large social media presence in my prior career, which was building freeware for teachers and tools for schools. And I had served as a product manager, and prior to that, I'd been a classroom teacher, and essentially had taken up the Learn to Code project and built a bunch of widely adopted teacher tools. So as a technologist, I love this idea of right-sized tools that can be picked up by a broad cross-section of the population. And I've kind of gone through the journey of scratching my own itch, so to speak, as a former teacher to ultimately a software developer. So that's kind of my story into technology, but my story into Braver Angels really was an experience of mobbing and intolerance in a social media environment where the possibility for deliberation was overwhelmed by this kind of tribal fervor, almost the sort of unwillingness to explore multiplicity of perspective. And so I started as a volunteer with Braver Angels and spent about 6 months there before they decided that I was indispensable. And I joined as CTO. So that's kind of my personal story for what it's worth. And so it makes me in some ways, I'm a social media dropout. I have become very skeptical of humans inside of these systems that we've built at this point. And Braver Angels itself is also very technically skeptical. So I guess I'll break from the norm and share a few slides to give you a sense of what it is we do. But are you guys seeing my slides okay? No, you're seeing my desktop. There it is. My messy desktop. Yeah, I mean, who are we? We're the a grassroots organization that focuses on bringing conservatives and progressives together on equal terms. And most of that work focuses on really trying to understand how we're different, how we think differently. And it's not necessarily about moving people to the center. It's more about getting them to listen and really appreciate the difference in perspective that does exist. But then to, with that accurate disagreement, find that common ground where it exists, and then ultimately, hopefully, ground some kind of community change or political change in the common ground that we discover. We are about 13,000 members. We have about 100 alliances in communities. Most of those are in counties or cities. Some of them are statewide. We've put on over 3,000 workshops and events, and those are all led by volunteers. So I'll talk about that in a second. And then we're really focused on ensuring red-blue balance. So at every level of leadership, down to the alliance, we ensure an equal number of reds and blues, and we use that kind of shorthand. We talk a lot about others as well. So if you're not a red or a blue, there's still a home for you at Braver Angels. I now call myself an other, politically homeless. Some of the sort of the key activities and initiatives that we do, a big focus on scalable workshops. So trying to train up volunteers either to moderate or organize or serve as technical assistants in the delivery of a kind of a menu of packaged workshops. And when I say they're packaged and meant to be modified to an extent. So a lot of infrastructure goes into that. A lot of that is digital. One of the workshops that is going to be of interest to this group is our Common Ground workshop, which iterates across many sessions, and over that sequence of workshops focuses on a single issue and attempts to produce something called points of agreement. And those are that work product essentially, depending on how it's done, in this case is being offered up as a report to the organization. In other cases, in local communities, those points of agreement have been used to drive local change. Another facet of our work is what we're calling the Braver Network. And this is really trying to attract organizations, both nonpartisan and partisan organizations across sectors, to join in the work of depolarizing American politics and our political discourse. So, and again, it's not about bringing people to the center, but it's about getting at an institutional level the leaders of these institutions and their members to engage this work. One of my colleagues is here representing Braver Politics, and that's about changing the norms of politics. So that's an area where we've done some work using Pol.is in organizing our town halls and debates as a way of sort of preceding and understanding where the audience is prior to the event. And then we've also done a number of pretty high-profile skills workshops for politicians, both at the state legislature level and at the level of the Congress. Many of those have been led by our esteemed Bill Doherty, who's a former family therapist, who's actually one of the workshop designers for Braver Angels. And that's been very interesting, getting red and blue politicians in the room together. Another big focus area is changing norms on campus. So we've got a very vibrant partnership with ACTA, which is I think it's the Association for College Trustees and Alumni, and an organization called Bridge USA, which hosts Braver Angels format debates. And those are debates where people are encouraged to tell their story, much the way I did when I came in, and to kind of ground their point of view in that debate in personal narrative, not to seek to win, but to seek to understand and to seek to be clear. Another focus is on media. We do produce podcasts, and we're engaging increasingly in going to conferences with journalists and trying to introduce them to Braver Angels' way of thinking. And another big event, which Chris mentioned, is our annual convention, which is sort of like a depolarization revival tent. It's just absolutely magical. Every other person you talk to is wearing a red or a blue lanyard or a yellow lanyard if they're other, and it's just like a giant family of people embracing disagreement in a joyous way. So it was really a cool event. On the tech side, we're doing a little bit of exploration at this point. We do a lot of work supporting all the work that I just said. Much of that is not specifically deliberative democracy tooling, but making it so that you can scale local workshops and make that very easy for volunteers requires a lot of tech. We do a lot of really ambitious program evaluation, a lot of internal dashboards and data pipelines and things like that. We try to empower our alliances with data. So every local alliance has a suite of tools that they can use to set up their marketing and communications and stay organized. And then we're focused at this point very heavily on understanding what drives growth. And it's a slow growing movement, I will say. Like we're at 13,000, and we see a lot of growth during national crises. But then in between crises, we tend to see 300 to 400 new members a month, and a little bit of attrition, not quite as much attrition as growth. But that's a key challenge for us is really getting this work to scale, and that's something where I think technology could be a very interesting offering for us. Our tech team is starting to branch out and pilot some things. So inside the organization, we have been approached by a number of deliberative platforms. Pol.is is one we have used. And then our membership is looking for a social platform that won't lead to the kind of experience that I described in my introduction. So that's it for me.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrew. That's brilliant. And I love that personal narrative. I mean, I'm seeing this challenge emerging. That there's plenty of knowledge there. There's plenty of experience at the government level. There's experience on the ground. Everybody's got a story. I was intrigued by that idea that when there's a crisis, the numbers grow. I'm actually struck by I think it was King Alfred in the UK way back before it was the UK said something like, it's in peacetime that things seem to develop. So if you're getting like these kind of like surges of people involved, and then there's got to be like a development phase when it kind of goes into a peaceful thing. I'm not sure, but hearing people's stories,
momentum-based organizing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, okay. And I was going to ask, a question to all the panelists now. We're going to move into this kind of discussion phase, where it's about, there's some really big challenges here. Like, okay, we want to get everybody in a country signed up to some kind of platform. We don't want them to argue. We want them to see each other as people. I mean, this is a challenge. Okay, so what do you think in your experiences, what are the biggest blocks, the hurdles there? And what I'm trying to do is like maybe get some kind of focus on specific areas that people can concentrate that are going to contribute to making that transition happen. So what do you think are the biggest challenges there? And anyone can go with that. I mean, whoever has a thought.
Yeah, I can go first.
Yeah, please, Alice.
I simply think the biggest challenge is what really would motivate people to do this. Right. If you don't have people, you don't have people on a platform, and you don't have people engaging. So the question is thinking about, you have millions, billions of people on social media. There's something really engaging about that. What can this field do to be so attractive where you have billions of people always engaging in the skills that we think that we should have as a society. So, and we experience it. I'm sure everyone here experiences, Andrew, especially running with Braver Angels. It's just as much as we advertise, as much incentive that we pay in cash to people to come to deliberations, you still have people that just don't want to show up. And simply because they just have better things to do and they have other priorities. And the question is, how can we make people prioritize talking with each other and engaging on these topics?
And that's brilliant. And I'm going to ask that question to others, but just coming off that, it's something that John has studied, I know, because I was reading a thing earlier about the effect of juries on people. Is there something there about the effect that this has on individuals that might make them want to come to the table when they hear stories of other people?
Yes and no. The story really reinforces how tragic it is that Alice is correct. The point of our jury research is that serving on a jury can have a lasting impact on someone's political engagement, increasing their likelihood of voting for years to come to a degree greater than an entire year of civics in college. That's great. And yeah, juries are just like Tocqueville thought when he went on that little college road trip across America. They look kind of awesome. It turned out that's true. The problem is, the reason we studied juries is we thought it was fascinating to look at a compulsory form of public engagement. The idea that democracy is self-reinforcing is a really fundamental idea to participatory theories of democracy. There has to be something kind of attractive about it, a contagion to make it self-sustaining. But how do you get that initial spark? And so some scholars like Jane Mansbridge were concerned that there was no way to really test that assumption that democratic participation is self-reinforcing because people show up because they already want to. So we studied the jury because they don't want to on the whole, and it works. It has that effect. But that doesn't solve Alice's problem. We joked at the end of that book, clearly the takeaway is that we need to have more law enforcement, more jury trials, more criminal charges brought up against people. In fact, the more charges, the better, because it makes the deliberative task more complex. That is a rather dystopian read and a sci-fi novel I still want to write someday, called The Jury Is Out. No, seriously. But yeah, so we have to give people incentives to get there in the first place. Just to add, to not repeat what Alice is saying, but to add something, let's say we get them there. Now, if we get them into a deliberative context that is highly defined with a great agenda, clear, things tend to work very well. I'm still waiting for the strong counterexample of a very well-structured deliberative process that fails. What we need to do with less well-structured processes is figure out how to give people an incentive to do something other than conventional sort of politics, name calling, and polarization and all that. So we can see things like prediction markets working pretty well. If you give people a strong incentive, they win the game essentially if they make good predictions. They can look at the political world through much more realistic lenses if they're really motivated by the prize. So there are ideas like that can get people to move toward a different kind of motivation, whether it's achievement or accuracy and so on. So when we're structuring these processes, I think that's one of the keys, is if we can get them there, let's think about what kind of motivational frame of mind they can get into.
Yeah. And is there something perhaps about, I mean, people join Facebook or Twitter because, people are going to see what they say because they connect with their friends. It's reducing a barrier of some kind. It means I can talk to 1,000 people with one sentence. It kind of increases my level of engagement. But this is like, there's something attractive about that. And, and then, all the algorithms and Twitter and Facebook and so on, they're designed to, keep you enticed with information, and people's attention spans are falling and so on. TikTok it's just enthralling, isn't it? Like this entertainment, and it's just destroying things. So is there something about the interfaces themselves? Can we imagine, like, how do we make it more human? Like, I mean I'm thinking about Liz here. How does Pol.is think about this interface with people? Because it's largely text-based conversation, isn't it? Is that very exciting for people to engage with?
Yeah, it's maybe relevant now to bring up the story of one of the original core inspirations for Pol.is was that Twitter had been able to mobilize people during the Arab Spring and the Occupy movement in general. But then once we were all out in the street, we couldn't say anything new and coherent together. And so you can see that even of today, Pol.is itself, we don't make you join a platform to use Pol.is. Pol.is is like a plugin. And actually 10 years later, it came back around, and there's a large story now in that Twitter built its first, now X, but in the year before the acquisition, Twitter built its first major feature in years called Community Notes, inspired by Pol.is's system, which they acknowledged publicly in Wired and also in their white paper. And that system is serving the world at scale. Currently, right now, they're only using it to deliberate on misinformation. But what Twitter has in combination with their trending topics is a world's deliberation platform. They've got a platform that everyone's involved with, and they have the bridging-based algorithms to help people find coherence. Wow. So yeah, we're really proud of our role in that. And I think we should say, you know, are we still, so I'm primarily relational in how I believe that we come to change one another and form continuous kinship relationships. At the same time, I will not deny that speech is text. Text is speech. And so when we're talking about offering people a text box for interacting, and we think about there is a global public conversation happening on the internet, you know, network mediated communications, there is a public conversation. Offering people a text box to join that public conversation with a little additional support, if you will, for facilitators.
That's the next thing I was about to ask. Yeah, I mean, that's what's missing. Like, we can get people to the table on Twitter and so on. You know, 13,000 people in Braver Angels, and Taiwan, they've got hundreds of thousands of people contributing to various decision-making processes. But then is the thing that's missing from those, is that facilitation? Is that having somebody feedback, sort of referee, whatever, you know, is that something that's missing?
I would say to your question earlier that I didn't get a chance to answer, I would say we're in a crisis of being heard. There's actually so much speech going on and not very much listening. And so I work with a team that designed as if what facilitators do is really, really hard, leaving out the expletives, and providing a mech suit for those people who would show up with listening capacity and coherence making capacity for the public conversation. And yeah, to do that in a text environment, I believe provides a low barrier, low experience conflict way for people to dip their toe in, their proverbial toe, into interacting with ideas that they may never have encountered before. And that's an encounter that needs support and protection so that we can come to influence each other, to perhaps change each other, to come into greater empathy for what each other is going through, maybe change each other's mind, all the things we love about deliberation. When we talk about augmenting deliberation with technology, I think we also have to talk about values, because a lot from the political science side, a lot of time is spent talking about what creates a legitimate deliberation. And then when tools are pulled in that are not themselves, tools are pulled in for use by the public or for being placed between public and the government, and those tools themselves are not owned by the public. The thing is, technology here also comes with values. So to create these systems, we need to bring the best values from political science and the best values for publicly owned technology. And I'll pause there, but I'm happy to go into what those values could be.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, we could actually take that question and hand it to Andrew about values. Is there something about values that draws people into braver angels? You know, is that something that, like a value, you can imagine a value-based sort of platform, you know, like emerging, like, hey, this is a platform for people who like this or that. I don't know. What do you think? And Alice has got a hand up. I've seen that. But yeah.
Well, I mean, I can speak to motivation. I would say a significant number of folks like myself have had some kind of a trauma, some sort of falling out, or an experience of the sort of overwhelming toxicity. And often that takes place in the breaking up of a family, the kind of estrangement at a personal level between friends, a feeling of not being able to speak freely in the workplace. So, I mean, there's a sort of a range of different motivators, and I think we have something called the Braver Angels Way, which I would encourage you to find on our website. I don't have it memorized, but it's sort of, speak freely and fully and without fear, is one of the key points. Is like this. It's a kind of safety in anti-fragility, right? Which I think it's a very tricky thing at the moment for us to navigate, but it's no viewpoint is not worth listening to if as long as it's offered in good faith, and we're very careful not to judge things as bad faith. Like, that's sort of the last place you go, even if you fervently disagree. So I mean, I think the values are pretty much everything from a Braver Angels point of view in terms of how we make decisions as an organization about who we platform. I mean, we almost never opt not to platform unless a viewpoint is just truly fringe or it advocates violence. And so we take a lot of risks in that regard to ensure that there is a diversity of viewpoints being presented, and that particularly Reds don't feel like it's just another kind of progressive subterfuge, right? To bring them across. So I don't know if that helps, but I do think there's a politicization of technologies that happens, right? I mean, you saw the way Musk took over Twitter was largely a political gesture, right? If you think about it became understood that Twitter was a blue entity, right? And there was and Musk represented an overtaking of that by a free speech vanguard, right? To the portion of the population that believes him and believes in his values, and that I think that speaks to how quickly and easily any platform potentially can run afoul of these mental models that people have about politics themselves, right? Like, and so it is. And I think Community Notes is brilliant, by the way. Like, I think the way Musk talks about that and the fact that he's elevated that since his takeover is a really interesting, almost irony, I guess, for you all. But it's this idea that we can't trust censors, we can't trust a central entity anymore. We all understand that. We've seen how that goes, right? When a misinformation panel decides things for us, right? So I think one of the key values is becoming that people are so immersed in this fragmentation of knowledge, this epistemic collapse, essentially, that's come about through the internet, right? That we're now starting to appreciate what a neutral community infrastructure might be able to offer, and so I think the motivation comes about through this kind of almost epistemic sickness that people have, right? And this sense that the environment they're in is so polluted with this kind of fragmentation and disinformation. How do we establish trust? Well, we have to invest in some kind of infrastructure that is not the attention economy, right?
Right.
So,
right. Yeah.
And it's a pretty heady thing to ask everyone to buy into, but I think that's the political message, and I guess I wonder if there aren't politicians who can grab onto that and who can frame the policymaking process as as different, right?
Yeah.
And so that might be one avenue, right? Is to make inroads with people who actually have to do this for a living. That's why, and our workshops have been very popular with politicians, because privately they are just exhausted and they don't know how to do their jobs with polarized public. Right?
I've heard that. From conversations I've had with, people involved in local politics, they kind of loathe the idea of a town hall where people come in and scream at them. It's stressful for a politician to, to be in these roles. So Alice, you've had your hand up for a while. What, something you'd like to add? You're still muted, by the way. Sorry.
Of course. I was going to comment on when Liz was talking about just the sheer amount of text and that's available now, and kind of ties into what Andrew was saying. My feeling is just people are so overwhelmed with the amount of information that exists in the world now, that's why tailoring your newsfeed and drawing an imaginary circle around what kind of information I receive is so attractive. And so there's a benefit, and problems, disadvantages to doing that, but it's just the sheer volume of information that really, stresses all of us out. Right. And we try our best to try to limit that, and by limiting it just causes other problems. And I share that not because I have a solution, but just because I feel that when we offer at least the deliberation that we do, people have an opportunity to just put everything aside and be in this space together for this limited amount of time, and that helps them focus and actually think with others. So I don't know what the solution is into limiting, the sheer amount of information. I don't think there is, but I think that through our methods and what we're trying to do, acknowledging that and really helping people navigate that would be great.
I think it's really important, like the sheer volume of information. As a scientist, the number of publications that grow, exponentially, and I just can't keep up, especially if you're a multidisciplinary scientist, it's next to impossible. You need a machine to read it for you and tell you what the output is. And in a way, that's kind of what Pol.is is, right? It's like, so I can see there's a sort of barriers here. It's like, barriers to curating information, helping people listen to that information, parse that information so that they can create good, feedback back to the system, but having that tap into their sort of personal values at the same time. That's kind of, I'm trying to distill the essence of what we've been talking about into like a couple of words. And now I'm conscious of our very patient audience who's sitting here, and we've actually been talking for almost an hour, and I'm like, wow, this is great. I'm sure we could carry on, but I would love to hear from our audience. Now, we were going to hear from Bill Carberry about a specific thing that Braver Angels was doing, but I don't see him in the room. So I'm wondering, maybe we'll just skip that part. Maybe, Andrew, I don't know if you've got like a few seconds just to sum up the electoral reform process, and then I want to open it out to the audience.
23 workshops, equal numbers of reds and blues, all discussing electoral reform and trying to identify points of agreement. And I believe the process of nominating points of agreement requires unanimity in the group, and that the outputs of that are then sort of fed into a database and tagged, and then over time they group them essentially. And so there's this kind of sorting and grouping and tagging process that's taken place, and then that, it's really just a way of sort of consolidating and distilling a broad set of, and I think there's 700 points of agreement that came out of those 23 workshops, and then that's going to be distilled down into a report. So the technical part of that I helped with was just getting him set up with Google Sheets and dashboards that would allow the team to kind of sort and filter and understand what all the points of agreements were, so they could come to meetings and have discussions about how to group them. So that's it.
Great. Okay,
Yep.
so okay, there's a lot of lived experience. Now, I just want to know if anybody has any comments or thoughts from the audience. If you'd like to raise your hand, maybe Claire, if we could just jump to seeing the whole
Sure.
gallery view. Is that
Yeah.
possible?
Oh gosh,
And
I gotta
then-
take you all off spotlight. Okay, give me a minute.
Oh, sorry, I should have
Oh
given you a
no,
bit of warning.
I'm joking. I'm joking. Like
Okay.
I said in the chat there, if anybody would like to raise their hand using the reaction or pop their question in the chat, like I said before, we welcome all questions. No question is a silly question, and yeah, we just love to hear what your thoughts are on such a fruitful discussion.
Yeah, I'll just give everyone a second.
Yeah, no pressure.
Summon their courage.
And Rum, thanks for sharing where you are in the world. Sounds like we're all jealous of the workshop. So thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Do you have anything to add to the conversation from, or anything that maybe you'd like to share from today that would be relevant? I'm totally putting you on the spot, by the way, so don't feel obligated to reply.
The background noise might be too much because I'm in the restaurant. Will you let me know how is the background noise here?
You sound okay to us. Yeah, thank you.
Great. So yeah, no, two great workshops today. Live report from the NCDD. John, you were missed, and Martin Carcassonne mentioned you in particular. So I got an introduction first to this amazing toolkit that the Interactivity Foundation has distilled of a lot of the best participatory deliberative processes. And it's just amazing, great introduction, great workshop and training. And then on the other side was Martin sharing about, from his experience of leading some multi-hundreds of these participatory processes in Colorado at the local level, getting yields on the regular, and just sharing his download like he does in a 2-hour workshop where it's like you should have a Broadway show or something, or a show in Vegas, because it's like the one-man show, just breaking it all down and building up your conviction and how advanced these practices are. And then, part of the conversation came around to what can we do that answers some of these challenges. A lot of us believe it is making citizens' assemblies more visible and more accessible as processes in the US. Chris knows that I'm all about turning this into a TV show in the election season so that people can actually see this in action. Selection of a mix of Americans by lottery that get one challenge after another in a battleground state where the issue is of local relevance, national relevance. It solves two things: the deliberative process. We have now a policy generation thing that people can relate with people like them on screen. And it actually fills in the media need to get a source of information for solutions journalism that is more well thought through, but with the voice and the perspectives of different actors and stakeholders involved. To me, the collaborative intelligence in action is the all-in-one and feeds the entire ecosystem with a different player, and we don't need to wait for government sanction to begin. So to me, it's all about that. And it's a very clearly articulated proposition by many people in this field, and I'm glad to be surrounded with allies and not doubters, because we're on track with it. We've got some really serious alliance forming with Represent.us and others to advance this. So, I see the way forward. I know, Chris, you're a believer too. I don't think the inquiry is really that dubious.
Right.
So that's my
Thank you.
provocation for the day.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
No, the idea of that was, the challenge that was posed in this conversation. How do you reach, the mass audience and the concept of a TV show, but then supported by the right tools? And there's some, immediate alarm bells that ring off, like if you expand too quickly, if it gets taken over by a bunch of producers, everyone watches The Bachelor and thinks, oh, the producers are messing with it, and it's like, there's just other forces at work that aren't, and it's a beast, isn't it? And it's hard to and so does anyone have any thoughts about that? Like, how, if we were going to do a massive scale up, what are the key things that absolutely have to be, carefully monitored, tracked? One of the purposes of these meetings is actually to connect academic rigor to that kind of mass scale up. That is, in a sense, actually the underlying driver behind me setting up these kinds of meetings is, we've got academics in the room, we've got people who know what they're talking about in politics, who experience, these things. So yeah, I see like, and just sort of throwing this out there as well. So number one, what is, how do we ensure that mass scale up doesn't introduce artifacts that are damaging? But then the other side of that is why, all these huge corporations have already got infrastructure. Like Alexa is capable of having millions of conversations simultaneously. And, I spoke to one person doing a PhD in AI consciousness and the morality of AI. She's saying she believes that Alexa is conscious on some level, whatever that looks like. What does it actually feel like to have a million conversations at once? Even if they're limited. But so nobody knows what all the code is for Alexa. It's this huge code base. There's no one person. It's this emergent beast. So it's like, there's some challenge there. Corporations kind of already know how to build these mass tools. There's dangers in that their drivers are not about setting up good policy. So how does a government and everyone interact with these big players to make, and how do we get this kind of wisdom from academia into that as part of the pipeline? That's my question for everyone. If anyone's got any thoughts.
I'll jump in there, Chris. I think you're going to hear a few different answers. For me, a pattern I keep seeing is, and this is really a U.S. pattern, though I have a feeling people have seen it in other countries, is there's this anxiety that we haven't gotten big enough. We haven't gone to scale yet. It has to be nationwide, and it has to be now. Ned Crosby, who created the citizens jury process that led to the Oregon CIR process, wonderful democratic reformer. He always hated it when I did this. Sadly, he passed away just not too long ago. But after the CIR was established by law in Oregon, imagine, your life's work becoming a state law. He called me to tell me the good news, and about a minute or two in, he said, so anyway, so that's good. So what we need is a national process to, it's like there's this drive to scale it up. And what I worry about is impact and demoralization of the people who participate. What I say when I work with partners often is, let's try to find something actually at a smaller scale. Let's work with a city or a county, or maybe a state. I mean, some states like California are as large as most nations on earth. But let's try to start at a smaller scale. Let's get some real buy-in from government. Let's get some stakeholders, activists interested and connected. And let's see if we can do something that really matters at that scale and build out from there. And some of those really successful software innovations like this, are in places like Barcelona or Madrid. They're place-based and they're vulnerable. I mean, they can disappear. The Oregon process has gone kind of moribund. It never had state funding. But I really think that's my big fear with scaling up, is that there's too much anxiety to make it happen and nothing comes of it. Because when I talk about the potential for deliberation, and I emphasize that most public officials really are passionate about governing and they really care about these things, people are forgetting that most public officials are running for local office. Congress is a whole nother thing, right? We don't even have a Congress in the U.S. right now. So I think we try to solve the big problem a little too quickly, and I wish we would focus more single-mindedly on making the best of local politics better and scaling up to the state level first.
I like that. That's brilliant. And then, yeah, Liz, please.
I mean, if anyone wants to jump in ahead of me, that's also fine, but I wanted to really plus one what John is saying, what everyone is saying here, that local really does matter. And, we love our size here in America, but diversity is what counts. I just really want to celebrate the Bravery Angels work and say that when the question comes to what technology is appropriate for the public to use to understand itself, and what technologies would be appropriate to put between people and the government with enough power to renew the social contract, I think we need to talk about the values in technology. And here's where my request to you, Chris, when we appeal to academia for values, we have to understand that every discipline has its own set of values. And so there are values that are stewarded by political science, that political science is the best at stewarding. And then when it comes to tool development and technology development, there are additional fields that have gone down very difficult roads in terms of understanding the kind of licenses that really put control in the hands of the users. And so if any of the audience here is unfamiliar with open source, technology can be built in public in ways that are owned by the public, copyrighted by all the contributors who contribute. And every time people use it and say, oh, that part could be better, and fix it, it gets fixed for everyone in the world all at once. And that's what we're seeing in the Pol.is code base, for instance, but Pol.is is not the only open source technology. And so the request here is when there can be an Alexa for deliberation, as we're hearing, we hear this from the academy being said, then do we want that kind of blank check being written for American big tech to be hired by the prime minister of an entire country at a time to just handle participation? Is that like, will the problem be solved if that's the solution? And so I'm here to show up side by side with this movement, the many movements that are coming together to open up participation so that we can talk about how we can safely hold this power together. Thank you.
I love it. Wow. Yeah, just passing all of that. Just like there's a lot of big ideas there. Like, in a sense, the thought that I had there was about values in any relationship of any kind, with whether the values kind of align or not, that kind of leads to that success, But and in some sense, maybe that's where like all that conflict originates. So having a continuous system which really helps people understand each other's values, but in which the system itself is completely neutral, it's just like never-ending process. Like, yeah, I'm trying to think, I'm trying to just sort of aggregate all the comments that people have made and sort of put them together. And in a sense, this is what the founding fathers were doing as well, right? When they sat down and wrote down like all of the rules about the elections and all of this, they were trying to come up with a system that would stand the test of time. And we found, in a sense, that to a certain extent, that system is kind of not functioning, as John said. Like Congress, what is Congress right now? There isn't one today, So maybe there's problems there. So, but have we learned enough? And what I'm getting from this conversation, like I've just made some like key sort of things like curation, listening, being in the space, building trust, helping with people being overwhelmed, and that key one about values. It's about, I'm just trying to see, yeah, and getting people involved, what makes them excited. I don't know. Does anyone have any as I'm trying to reflect this back to you, these are all the things that everybody has said, and I'm just kind of saying them back to this group as a kind of way to see if it's kind of, making anybody think in a particular way. I don't know. I mean, Elizabeth, I'm going to pick on you for a moment. Do you mind? Because you're at Braver Angels, and I'm just wondering what you're making of this conversation. Would you care to say a few thoughts?
I am glad to be here, and I'm very interested in the tech application of your work. I am actually not a fan of deliberative democracy. I like the republic democracy balance that we have. I think that it is an extremely good thing, and I think that it should be protected. I'm not really interested in replacing it with deliberative democracy. I think that deliberative democracy can have a place in conversation for sure, and in helping people understand each other. I think that it can potentially be used on local level direct democracy issues where it might be a better alternative to direct democracy, help people find greater consensus. But on a large scale, I'm generally opposed to it if it's suggested as an alternative to existing systems that are more small R republic oriented.
Interesting.
I apologize for
What
the
for?
bad news in that respect.
No, don't worry. No, that's not bad news.
I'm
This is
very
great.
excited to hear. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are you excited about improving in these systems that you value?
So, for example, I've watched in my local community, there's been a school bond that has been repeatedly proposed over the last few years. It's desperately needed. The high school has been the same since decades before my generation was going through it. And at the closest, just a few years ago, it came 12 votes shy of hitting the 60% barrier that was needed for it to pass and for a new high school to be built. And at this point, there had been an existing build plan, there was an existing sewer plan, and all of that has now expired, and it's going to have to all be redone, which increases the cost enormously. And the demand and the need for it has not gotten any lower. I think that on something like that, deliberative democracy could be very useful in the community and helpful to promoting something like that. Because I think a lot of the opposition to it was just stubbornness on the part of the older generation that exists in the community, who just saw it as a thing that would increase their taxes, and didn't see it as something that would be broadly beneficial. And so I think having those conversations in a deliberative democracy format could be really helpful. I think the same thing, honestly, about school board stuff happening all over the country. I was just in Lone Tree, Colorado, where they're having some very significant frustrations over school funding issues, and I think that's a primary application in my mind. I'm concerned generally when people feel as though they haven't been heard on the topic, and when people fear that that their perspective is going to be crushed by the opposition winning. And I think that the conversations that deliberative democracy creates in general are very beneficial to mitigating concerns where those are overblown, and to helping people more accurately understand each other and perhaps even find consensus when that was the primary barrier.
That's brilliant. So you're thinking useful in small cases, which is kind of reflecting a little bit what John said about, making things happen in the small scale rather than the big scale. And Andrew, pop your hand up. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, no, I figured Elizabeth might talk about that point of view, because it sort of harkens back to the actual meaning of republicanism, which it sort of reminds me that I think there's a difference between creating better deliberative technologies and the movement of and a movement toward deliberative democracy per se, right? And I think it's worth examining the ways in which better deliberative tools can also help in a Republican style of government, right? Where it may not be that the citizens are directly participating. It may be that the elected leaders themselves lack the right technologies to be able to deliberate, right? Case in point, the dysfunction of our Congress. What technologies are they using, right? And so I mean, I do think it's important to maybe separate the two and say that we need really good deliberative tools, no matter whether we buy into the idea of deliberative democracy per se, right? Whatever form of democracy is your flavor, you need good deliberative tools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would even say that I could get on board with deliberative democracy so long as it was non-binding. Even at the national level, I think those discussions are worth having. I think that getting people together across difference is really important. I am just extremely opposed to it actually being a form of government.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, there's serious concerns. Like if you take a lottery-based group, have you not just switched out one dictator for someone else? There's no accountability if you take. There's lots of people who kind of talk about lotteries as the drawbacks thereof.
Well,
but the deliberation is. Sorry.
For me, it's very much that I'm a small R Republican, not just a large R Republican. And so I think that the 30% should be protected from the 70% too.
Right.
Cool. 70% is a better consensus than 51%. And so I think it's a positive improvement, but sometimes I think democracy is wrong. And I don't think that deliberative democracy is less capable of being wrong than forms of democracy that require majority rather than consensus. That is my absolute core concern when it comes to deliberative democracy. It's not the actual process of deliberation. It's not the process of finding consensus. It's the attaching it as a form of government, the belief that a democratic group of people, 70% of them can decide on something and therefore the rest of the people have to live with it. Like, I generally and genuinely, as a smaller Republican, think that a much longer form of deliberation is required in the form of representative democracy, and in the form of the 30% being protected from even a group of 70% of the country that thinks they're right.
John, you look like you have a lot of things to say.
Just a couple. So Jim Fishkin, who Alice works with at Stanford, often has me visit his undergraduate class to talk about the idea of, which Elizabeth was alluding to, I think, of a sortition chamber. So what if you had a randomly selected body alongside an elected body, which is something I've written about. That view is fringe within the field of deliberative democracy. So when we say what is deliberative democracy, John Gastel with Eric Olin Wright represents one particular view, which is not ascendant and is not even commonly advocated within the literature on deliberative democracy. More commonly, it's meant as a corrective to participatory democracy, which, Elizabeth, I think is really more proximate to your concern. That is, participatory democracy said democracy will be better if just more people get involved. And deliberative democracy came about as a bit of a reaction. Well, it's great that lots of people are involved, but wouldn't it be nice if we actually cared about evidence and listened to each other and were, willing to consider alternative arguments and points of view? If you get back to, the early principles of little r Republican democracy, it's all about deliberation. I mean, that's how Fishkin likes to write about it, is it's, deeply rooted in American history and so on. So the other thing I would say there is that the literature and research on deliberative democracy is so rich and varied that it really can talk about any configuration of a democratic system, all kinds of institutions and extra institutional activities like Braver Angels and so on. Certainly the sortition idea is out there, but it is still kind of out there. The one qualification I would have is I love this little anecdote from Judge Richard Posner, a conservative critic of deliberative democracy, who said, if this idea of randomly selecting citizens and having them deliberate was such a great idea, I think it would have appeared somewhere in the U.S. Constitution. And an audience member said, well, doesn't it occur several times? Because that's what the jury system is. And Posner, a judge, said, well, that's just an exception. It's actually a great example of how effective deliberation can be at, bolstering the legitimacy of an entire branch of government.
Right. And I also think that it can be used in constructive and interesting ways, like, for example, if you want to talk about financial reform, where you need experts, real experts, to understand these big complex systems, and having like human values brought into the conversation. I know that elected politicians often don't get much time to absorb like complex information, large amounts of complex information, before they have to make judgment calls. So it's just sharing the load of understanding of comprehension is not a bad thing. Having groups of people parse like difficult concepts, and being able to get like fiduciary responsibility or something into like a process, that might be really an important way in which deliberations can help to improve the clarity and
Can I just interrupt you there, Chris, for a second?
Yes, I'm conscious of time.
No, not because of that. I just wanted to give space for Kelvin, who had raised something in the chat earlier on, and we got so into it with our conversation. And Elizabeth, you raised some great provocations there, so thank you. Kelvin, would you like to come off mute and share your thoughts or question that you posed, or would you like me to read that on your behalf? I can scroll back up. You're on your iPhone, so maybe you're out and about and not able to talk.
Could be that Kelvin's iPhone itself wishes to contribute, just so we don't prejudge it.
Okay, well, while you gather your thoughts there, I'm just going to read that. What did he say? Please read. Okay, no problem. Will do. I'm channeling you right now. So on the topic of scaling artifacts, a platform that has the power to voice numerous political opinions, we come up against the issue where many opinions or reactions to policy suggestions actually overlap and offer similar solutions in different verbiage. Once some dozen of voices are intermixed, it is not unreasonable to think that people will tune out, given the sheer number of possible voices and consenting or dissenting opinions on any political issue. And the kind of question for you all there is, ought there to be a platform mechanism to amplify or deafen overlapping opinions so as to encourage continuing engagement? I'm going to copy and paste it again. So I don't expect you to like digest all of that. But if anyone wants to jump in with that, feel free.
I'm thinking about Pol.is at this point, Liz. It's kind of that idea that you only introduce new things, and that when the new ideas have already been created, that they don't get repeated.
Yeah, this is really great thinking in this question. I really appreciate it. Yeah, amplify or deafen overlapping opinions. Yeah, you know, when you have a lot of people with a lot of opinions and a lot of different values and a lot of ideas, well, it's just sort of a lot. It's a real information processing challenge. And yeah, I've become very interested in tools that can help us get past comments or replies, or the war to be the most eloquent or articulate of a certain idea, and so something gets said again and again and again, and egotistically we want to be the one to have got that winning phrasing in, and even that is a kind of battle argumentation. So yeah, I would love the opportunity to share a little more information after the, we're almost at time. So, later I can share a little bit more information on how, coming up with a system that can hold a very high dimensional conversation and still be auditable, still have the record, and let everyone weigh in on what everyone else thinks. I think there's some tech choices on, do you want a system that reads and interprets, or do you want to give the power to people to interpret other people? Yeah, thanks.
And I think coupled into that is, the power of words. Like sometimes words can be triggering. Humans are emotional creatures. When we all have our belief filters and so on, and just one word wrong in a sentence can really, they could be identical sentences. Just but would change one word and people get upset. And so there's a real complexity to humans and how we can pass this.
Thanks for bringing some levity there, John. I appreciate your fun vibe in the chat.
Oh, sorry, I just saw that. Yeah.
What do you mean we're emotional? I was just conscious of time and being respectful.
Yes, me too.
It's the end of the day for everybody, Chris. So not to cut across you, but
no, I'm done. Yeah.
Do you have any closing comments, or do you want me to wrap up?
I just want to say thank you to everyone for taking part, and that this has been a great conversation. I hope that everybody's enjoyed listening to it and taking part. And this is as much about building relationships and connections as it is about, solving problems in this immediate hour and a half. Yeah. So hopefully this isn't the end, and we've got a whole series of other conversations lined up. And I hope you would like to come back and partake in those. So thank you to everyone for taking part, and
Yeah, and thank you for convening such a great group of thought leaders and movement builders, and folks doing great work in this space, and people who are just passionate about the topic. And thanks for all of you for dialing in on your Thursday afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. I will be sharing the recording. I always aim for the day after, but sure, yourself, tech doesn't always cooperate, or something that goes wrong or whatever. So I'll aim for tomorrow to share out the recording with those of you who registered via Eventbrite, and I'll also share some of the resources that were shared in the chat. And for our panel of speakers, if there's anything you would like me to pass on your behalf, resources, you have my email. Please just send that to me before maybe noon Pacific tomorrow. I'd appreciate that, and I can send it on your behalf. And so just thank you so much.
One tiny little thing, if anybody watching wants to hear more about those talks, do sign up to the Deliberation Gateway mailing list, and then at least you'll get the information. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you all so much. Take care of yourselves. Have a great evening. Bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.